Welcome to another episode of the Apex Perspective podcast. Today I have with me Ravi Hampole, who is currently the SVP Executive Creative Director at Nutrafol. Beforehand, he led at Lululemon, where he helped expand the global growth in terms of brand at Lululemon specifically. He also supported that growth leading to $3 billion to $11 billion in annual revenue at Lululemon. And beforehand, he also was able to pitch successfully a brand and a product at specifically Lyric, which led to a Series B investment of $160 million. Now, Ravi, can we start with more about your background and how it led you to really what you're doing today?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'll say thanks for having me. This is awesome. I'm super excited to be here, and I love talking about this stuff. So I'm excited for the conversation. The thing I would say in terms of like background and what led me here is that I was trained as a traditional graphic designer in school, and when I came out, I was immediately immersed into the world of like retail. And when you start thinking about retail, you start thinking about making a decision on a shelf in under a minute for most customers. And I learned this at my first in-house job at Johnson & Johnson, and I was overseeing beauty care, and then I went into women's health. So you imagine brands like Aveeno, Lubriderm, etc. And I started to understand over my career and time what it meant to create an impression on a customer in terms of getting a connection, getting an attachment, and then obviously converting to someone that either is a loyal customer, loves the experience, etc. It started with the shelf and the shelf of products, understanding how people searched, bought, but then I started understanding what the story was behind the product was as important as even what the product did itself. And as my career went along from Johnson & Johnson then to Starwood, where I went from the shelf to an immersive experience, you start to understand, with a hotel, the brand isn't about just the shelf and doesn't stop there or even just the bathroom. It's actually looking at the holistic experience. So everything is part of the brand there, right? You're looking at like the scent when you walk in, the lighting, the sheets, the bedding, and most importantly, what the service is like of that hotel. So that's when I started understanding even more so like the immersive qualities that a brand can have, and more importantly, when you wrap that brand together for a hotel, and this is kind of where my real big move happened. I understood the brand, especially at Starwood, and there were 10 brands that I oversaw, is you're selling and managing a brand. So you're working with ownership to sell, manage, and maintain a brand, right? So now you've got a playbook that owner has to work with. You're not actually physically doing the work as we would have been doing at like Johnson & Johnson. So you've got to have a really hard playbook, and that playbook and the way that the brand is perceived, we would have what we call the guest experience index, a score from 1 to 5. The higher that score was, 4 and above, the more revenue was attached to it.
Right.
So you actually see a one-to-one relationship of things being on brand and brand standard to the revenue that's received by that brand. And so that click happened to me going, oh, wait a second. It's actually, it matters so much what the standards of the brand are and how that's communicating what the brand is, and then how people receive that brand afterwards and experience it. It's one-to-one. So then as I moved on further, I took that same knowledge into going into startups, working on a startup hospitality company called Lyric, then building that idea from the product and brand up. The two things are like connected. And then also Lululemon to go, the most important thing when you're expanding and you're dealing with a company globally is how the brand shows up consistently over the entire globe. And the understanding is there from the inside out, from the people that are servicing, the educators, to the customer that's coming and buying the product. So you really understand the value of brand. And I like I said, I started as a designer, but
Right.
then moved very quickly into the world of brand and brand strategy and then marketing, because all of those
Mhm.
things tied together. Design is just a design, but you need to understand how the whole cycle works and the whole system works.
Absolutely. And I'd love to start off by talking about what you've done at Lululemon. At the time and when you started, it appeared like a lot of the brand was present in North America, but subsequently in your time there, a lot of it expanded into the global market. Now, what I'm understanding from our conversation is that when you understand brand and the mechanics behind making a brand, you can actually create new customer segments, and those new customer segments can actually drive revenue to the company. So tell me a little bit more about how you were able to understand that process of kind of expanding that brand globally and how you implemented the execution of that.
Yeah, so really interesting. When I got to Lululemon, it was a $3 billion company in terms of its valuation and revenue. And so when and the goal was to hit, I think it was 9 billion when I had started in a 5-year time span. That was a
Mm-hmm.
5-year plan. Now you can imagine when I left, it was 6 years that I had spent at Lululemon, and it hit 11. So the trajectory, they talk about the hockey stick in terms of growth. This just felt like it was going straight up the wall. It was so massive and so steep that sometimes it was hard to really understand what was going on. But I think the reality was that the growth was happening in China, and then APAC, specifically Korea and Japan, Australia as well, but mostly Korea and Japan. And then they
Mm-hmm.
opened new markets. Thailand was another one as well. So the thing over there is that you're introducing the customer to a new product.
Right.
Uh, and what's really interesting over there as well is how much travel is happening between these regions and countries.
Mm-hmm.
So what was starting to happen when I got there was the expansion was moving along. Retail, in terms of expansion in China and APAC, was growing massively fast.
Mm-hmm.
And what was happening was the brand was starting to shift a little bit, because the premium nature of the brand was elevated once you got into, further into the East. So price point was a little bit different. There, what brands were seen around Lululemon was different. So if you go to China, you're looking
Mm-hmm.
at brands that, even though they're not in that segment, Loewe, Louis Vuitton, like things like that, that
Right.
have associations with the premium nature of the brand. And
Mm-hmm.
so it was starting to fray a little bit.
Okay.
And then the idea of it being a performance brand wasn't exactly really well known. So you imagine there's a
Mm-hmm.
couple of things are happening. There's expansion, COVID hits,
Mm-hmm.
people are wanting comfort. So
Mm-hmm.
what started to happen was moving more so um, into what I would say is slightly incremental, but still based on the lifestyle,
Mm-hmm.
or casual offerings, right? So people could be at home and wear the Lululemon pants or the sweats, etc., but still feel like they had an elevated look. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a huge shift. So you saw a big move to go into more lifestyle product over just pure performance.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with that is that you have to shift the brand to accommodate for that massive move and shift, that you have to start thinking not just purely about performance, but what is the before, during, and after experience of someone
Right.
that's athletics, right? And the majority of people that are still attracted to it are in the athletics world, and we're also trying to attract more men.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the world had also shifted, where, uh, and this is really a really interesting piece. For Lululemon, that was mainly a female focused brand. We had
Mm-hmm.
introduced men's, but the way in for men were through females, the majority. So most women were buying for men, their
Okay.
partners.
Okay.
That shifted. So now all of a sudden, because of the way that the world is working in terms of access to information, shoppability being a lot easier, men were buying from men. So you've got this shift happening too. So you've got, just to paint the picture of like all the things that were happening at that time, what do you have? What do you do?
Mm-hmm.
You've got to create a consistent brand narrative, and you've got to readjust and reaffirm what the foundation of the brand is. So what did we do for the first 2 years? One, we built a stronger foundation of the brand that was
Mm-hmm.
understood globally. What I entered into was just a brand that was understood in North America. It was not understood by a different consumer. So we had to understand what that like higher
The
level.
customer segments.
Yes, the segments we dove into. Who are the new segments? What are they? Then we also went back in and said, let's actually reconfigure what our aspirational target is. Who's our muse? Who's the person that's really that we want to see overarching all of those segments that will tie it together? Because each one of those, if you even dive into the problem solution part of a segmentation, it's fine. You can like target, you can like get at certain problems, and you can deal with that with product. But the reality is there's an aspirational piece to all of it that we want to make sure that we're like attaching ourselves to and we're building towards. So brand foundation,
Mm-hmm.
rebuilt it, repositioned. We
Mm-hmm.
started talking about movement in general in terms of any movement is great movement and bringing people into the joy of movement, which then leads you to this idea of feeling great about yourself and feeling at your best, which then at the top end is reaching your full potential in life. So
Wow. Storytelling.
we built that whole thing. Yeah, what's the story? And so inviting people to the joy of movement was actually where the story ended up being. That's the idea. So anything that we started doing anywhere in the globe, which was a general human truth that like movement does create joy of any
Right.
type and connection, that ended up being the way that we talked about the brand in anything that we did.
Very interesting.
Always about the joy of movement. And then you ladder it down to fit and feel, which is about the quality of the product, superiority of the product, and then the feeling that it has on your body, which is the tailoring, which is something that's very unique.
They're all connected. All those are connected. That's very interesting.
All connected. So we rebuilt the whole scaffolding and the whole brand positioning in a manner in which everyone could understand it and then utilize it. And then we also put together um, what I would say is a brand platform.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
the last 3 years, there's been a very solid brand platform which communicates one big idea globally from
Mm-hmm.
for a marketing purpose, consolidates the dollars
Mm-hmm.
from a marketing standpoint. So all regions are contributing into a dollar that goes into this platform. And what you're building off of that are basically 4 tentpole moments for the year off of a big idea. So to give
Lovely.
an example more specifically, this year, it was a final campaign that I built, was called Yet. And it's going back to the roots of yoga and the yoga mindset of like a growth mindset. So if you think about, and I'm not sure if you do yoga or not, but if anyone does, and if you do, you would kind of get the idea. But I think you get it anyway. Is
Mm-hmm.
that it's easy to say I can't do 50 push-ups, but that sentence changes when you say I can't do 50 push-ups yet. Now
Yeah,
you're in growth.
absolutely.
So we started looking at that idea across the board and created a brand platform globally that also had different languages express what that sentiment was, because that
Mm-hmm.
yoga right, is still in everything, right? It's a human truth, right? If you can change the
Correct.
way you approach it, that was the platform. And then we developed 4 big moments seasonally, because that's how
Mm-hmm.
apparel works, from
Mm-hmm.
your first out of the gate January moment, which is about training. And
Mm-hmm.
we actually created an activation globally that was taking over, one, creating our own training studio, and one here in LA, and then across the globe they did other ones, and that people could come and like actually get the experience of training with great ambassadors under this idea of and challenging themselves to do something that they hadn't done yet or they wanted to achieve. And then there's a summer moment, so on and so forth. So you consolidate these things, and when you think about doing the studios, you're consolidating your earned dollars as well.
Right.
So your earned moment becomes a global earned moment, not just one that happened in China, not just one that happened in North America, not just one that happened in Thailand, right? It's like you're now putting all these dollars together, because we didn't have a ton of dollars. So when you think about brand foundation, brand positioning, platform development, consolidated dollars, and earned media, you get this ability to grow without
in different markets.
Yeah, and you understand the segments, and you're still targeted, but then you're growing like that, and you're also, as we said it, and this is how we built it, was that it's not a one size fits all. It's
right,
like,
of course,
globally consistent, locally relevant. So our ambassador program, the people who do like yoga, tennis, golf, running, training authentically, they have their own studios, they have their own practice, they are working in the space. They're not celebrities. They're in with the communities in the regions that they're in. So it's
very smart.
Not celebrity talent. Sure, there might be a couple that we lean on that might be a few celebrities, but what you realize very quickly is there is no global celebrity. No such thing.
Exactly. But the community in these different regions, when they're participating with these brands, this is exactly how this expands, right? And one thing I was really curious about is, do you think all those components in terms of brand foundation, in terms of everything we discussed, in fact, do you think all of that is responsible for the global growth, or do you think there's one that was specifically the more helpful aspect of growing this growth, or having this growth happen?
I think the idea that it was a couple things. One is, I think, when you're expanding retail and your footprint at that scale, it's going to contribute heavily, because you're going to get more community work and more eyeballs, feet in stores very fast. So that like expansion from a strategy standpoint and from a business standpoint was huge. So when you start thinking about that, paired with the idea that we're going to open our offering from just pure performance to lifestyle and performance, but then put the two things together, that strategically was actually quite huge. And then the last thing, the line of globally consistent, locally relevant, I think that contributed quite a bit. So when you open the brand up to making sure that it's going, it feels like it's of the place that it's in. So there's a lot of consumers that in China, for example, feel like the brand originated from China. So I think that's the win, is when you're not coming in as an outsider, but you're coming in as someone that feels like they're part
Very
of it.
interesting.
And that, I think, is actually a really big component. So, of course, growth through the other two things that I talked about, product offering and then footprint. Those will expand the brand very quickly. But I think it's the way you activate those things that is really critical. And so when you still maintain the idea that's core to Lululemon of community, but you're actually investing in the people that are on the ground, and you're investing in the story that's on the ground, that's when it creates the most resonance, because people are like, oh, I can still go to a Lululemon, in Shanghai, and I can get connected with an ambassador that is going to do a yoga class like at their studio, or sometimes we're trying to integrate it into the stores. So
wow,
it's a huge piece of it. I don't think people
understand that. It's hard to understand because you're not seeing these moving components behind the scenes. But for you, as independently, in terms of independent of Lululemon, what do you think is your thinking process behind creating a brand identity and how it can resonate with these customer segments?
Yeah, I think one, understanding the customer segments is huge. Like, it's just, who are we targeting? Who are the varied customer segments? What can we take off of that is still important? Also, there's a question too of like, in some of the pieces, are they all what we want? So, as an example, in terms of looking at like, high value guest, um, the high value guest is always the one that you want to really lean into as much as you can, and then understanding where that high value guest is going. So, as they age out, in certain respects, like who are you bringing in under that to then carry
Right.
momentum and expand? Because it's a real problem that even Lulu had, and I think still has, is that when you've got a high value guest spending around $5,000 to $10,000 a year on clothes, um, it's a very specific group of people that we found were also aging out. So but then when you start to make other things for younger generations, you start to shift the narrative, and you also start to shift what is interesting, what is part of the brand, right? Because what that high value guest represented and we're into isn't necessarily what the future high value guests will be into. So you've got to
Wow.
actually start to think about that from both product sensibility and what you're making, and that thinking through, like, if you have core styles, for example, like a defined jacket or the Align pant, you've got to continue innovating on those styles, even though they might be iconic. Because if you think about, like, the Align pant is like a $1 billion SKU. Like that's on its own, right? And that's only been out for like 10 years. So you have to sit there and go, cool, we've got a high value guest is still investing in it, but they need newness that's coming in. And then younger generations that will then be future high value guests also need to see newness in that product as well. So you start to get to this place where you need these core styles to have newness to them. You need this newness to be explained in a way that still holds the story together for the
Right.
brand, right? So it can't
Yeah.
change.
Yeah.
You can't all of a sudden just be like, oh, we're gonna, even when we made shoes, that was a tough one because it's a new category that most
Exactly.
you guys should not be dealing with this.
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
and that's also part of the expansion thing as well. It's like you have coming with new categories. We had Mirror, Peloton, shoes, and you're getting into things that even at one point we had hiking and trail didn't make sense. Like it wasn't
Wow.
really making sense for the brand. So you've got to like continue to go back to the core and understand how the world's evolving and how that story needs to evolve with it. So when you're creating that
Exactly.
identity, it needs
And
to be very focused.
right. And I'm now sitting here and really understanding that branding is really allowing a company to do certain take initiatives that it wants to take, right? So if there is a customer segment that's aging out, like you said, there has to be a shift in potential branding to attract the younger individuals that are going to be come in that age bracket that will be the ICP for that company. So branding is kind of the capacity of the company, what it wants to do. It's a bridge to allowing it to what it wants to do, essentially, is what I'm understanding here. But I'd
Yes.
like to know. Yeah, go ahead.
I
Go
was
ahead.
just going to say one other thing to that is, and I think it's a buzzword today. It wasn't when we started talking about it, but that was kind of the idea of like globally consistent, locally relevant was the idea of relevance. And so today you're hearing cultural relevance, cultural relevance, cultural relevance is key in real life cultural relevance. So you see it
Yeah.
with, even how the Gap has performed recently is truly about that idea that this cultural relevance is a thing.
Yeah.
And that's still also important, that with it and your ability to hold fast to your values, ideals, and what the brand is, while still being flexible enough and having enough in there to be able to move up and down the segmentation.
It sounds delicate. Yeah.
It's very
Yeah.
delicate.
Yes.
You
Yes.
can
Yes.
lose if you hit something you feel is culturally relevant, but it might have it might be too polarizing.
Right. And that is a delicate balance you have to have. But a quick question about your leadership approach, and I think
Yes.
that's going to be really interesting, is before we get to a little bit more about you, is really working with global teams specifically, right? So one of the things I've learned through studying mergers and acquisitions is that a lot of the reasons why there's sometimes unsuccessful mergers and acquisitions is because global teams don't work as well due to clash of culture. So a question for you is, how do you approach? I'm sure you had the chance to work with global teams. How do you approach that with a potential issue of clash of culture?
Well, I think the idea, well, there's a couple things about that. I think that's a great question. It's like, one is when you build, like you're working in a global capacity and you're building global teams, I think majority of companies, especially that are existing today, still have a Western mentality.
Mhm.
And I think as people go through and start thinking more about how they're building these businesses, and as we were doing at Lululemon and other places that I work were much more successful at it, was hiring in people with global expertise that come from different places.
Mhm.
There's a lot of places that have global entities that are all hired from North America, and people don't have like an understanding of other cultures. So that's like
Mhm.
one that I would propose anyone to do that is like in a global business and working in a global capacity. Like you've got to hire a very diverse group of people so that have varying cultural backgrounds but also global backgrounds. So it's way more helpful to have someone that may have worked in Europe somewhere for a time being or is European that can be part of the global team, or same thing with someone that has grown up in China and can work as part of the global team. That awareness is really, really helpful. The other thing is then having um, being humble enough to know that you don't know everything and understand when you need to know the research and understand
Mhm.
the culture. So in the global capacity that even I held, the amount of travel that I would do to those other places to see the culture, immerse in it, do a yoga class in Shanghai, do a yoga class in Seoul, or I'm not a runner, but other people would go for runs, and you meet it from a connection standpoint. Is understanding the
Mhm.
culture of those sports there too, or just the way that people connect, like what kind of dinners does everyone want to have, what kind of breakfast, what kind of workout do you want to do, so you start to immerse yourselves in it and understand the other side, because when you're just sitting on Zoom having conversations about things, you're not going to get it. Like I would never understand that there isn't actually a word for saying yet in that platform for
Mhm.
China. It just actually doesn't exist.
Right.
That Yeah. So okay, I'm going to work with the Chinese team with them in person to figure it out, and
I
then
love
also
that.
other agencies and things that can help us understand the cultural nuance of like, well, okay, how would you guys say it? Because it's a human truth, right? The so I think the on that it's like really important to be connected to all of those regions, and
Mhm.
I on a weekly basis am connecting with their marketing leads in the regions, their creative
Mhm.
leads every uh I would do every Wednesday is the around the world international calls with the creative teams and the marketing leads to go through everything that everyone's doing to make sure that it was on brand but also culturally
Excellent.
relevant. So
Wow.
that's how it was. Listen, it was not easy.
Right. Right. Of course. I mean, that's a completely different region with completely different mannerisms, different understandings. I mean, that sounds like it's very difficult, and there's a reason why it's one of the reasons why some mergers don't actually work on the long run. So I really appreciate that approach of really immersing yourself in their environments and understanding them, Therefore, I think that can kind of make it much easier to communicate with them and kind of get their lingo a little bit. So I really appreciate that perspective. So what I want to do now is share go ahead and ask you one or two questions about you, and then we'll go ahead and conclude the podcast with a quick fitness segment, and then with your next year plans. So the main question I want to ask you is, what is something about you or your life that you wish more people knew about?
That's a great question as well. I think you got great, amazing questions. And the thing I wish people knew the most is, I think, how much, because I think oftentimes it gets very like focused on business and work, and for me, like, having really good family time is important. I have, my wife and my two kids that are, 13 and 15, and oh, sorry, he's gonna be mad, 12 and 15, but he's gonna be 15 soon.
Okay, great.
I think the family piece is really critical, and it's important to me, and that that time away from the desk of the work is just as important, if not more important, than the desk work. And I do a lot of art, and so and I'm trying to get back into it. So it's I think these are really critical things. I think people can get a sense of who you are in the workspace, and it's not exactly correct. So
Of course not.
I think there's more to life than just the business. There's just a whole other world behind it, and I think people need to approach others with that same thinking too. That this is the job, but there's a million other things going on in your world, in your life, and they're equally, if not more important than what you're probably spending your 8 hours a day doing.
What do you think is the biggest difference between you in your 20s and then you now?
Me in my 20s I was gunning for it. I was ruthless. I did mean things. I did things that I don't think serve me so much today. And I think it probably, I would say, probably from a mental standpoint. Maybe I'll put it a different way. When I was in New York, and I think New York is just like this, is we were there 15 years, and I think you were always watching your back, like that someone is trying to get your job. And if you left that job, it didn't matter. It's like it's someone else is going to take it, and you and your influence on that, whatever work you were doing, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. So
Wow.
like, I think then I thought it all mattered. It mattered, like having that role. You can't get my role. I'm going to get the next one. I'm going to climb as fast as possible. And I think, when I was in New York, it was fast. I moved up fast, but I was very ruthless. And so, but that was the culture. It was like,
maybe because you had to. That was the culture.
You had to. There was no, like, literally, it felt like someone's ready to just like cut you, like at any point. Like, it's just this. And my wife felt the same way. We were just like, this is you, and you feel so aggressive. And that nature of being, when people say New Yorkers are mean, I'm like, New Yorkers aren't mean. They're just direct. And, that's just the way that it is. So if I think about those 20s, that's what that was about. And do I thank myself for having the ability to have all those experiences and then get to the places that I got to? Absolutely. I don't know that I would be here today in these positions if it weren't for that time in my 20s where I was just gunning and understanding as much as I could. I just like soaked it in. Like if someone's showing me like, the P&L sheet, showing me the budget, I'm learning and learning about operations. Okay, how does that work? Like I'm going to learn it so that I can understand it and then climb. Today,
who is Ravi today?
Today, as it's listen, I think I'm still working it out, and I
Okay.
think what I'm understanding though is that the job isn't, and I think I was kind of alluding to this before. The job isn't everything. There's more to it than that, and I think you can, when you also understand your power in terms of what your abilities are and what magic you serve the spaces that you're in. When you can start to understand that better, you can ease a little bit, like calm yourself, like really sit in your power and sit in what you do bring to the table that others might not. And I think
Mhm.
that understanding is really good because it gives others their power as well. And I think that's the
Wow.
thing that's really important, is to not try and be the most powerful thing in the room, the most important thing in the room. You're a contributor, you're a person that should collaborate, and you should be like, um, I think, humble and honest in that sense. And I think that's the biggest difference between 20s to now, is that I think, we're all works in progress, but once you start to realize the world isn't you,
Mhm. Right.
it's a
Love it.
pretty big opener, you know?
Yeah. That's a really interesting perspective that I think I'm definitely gonna start catching on to as I go to the world as well. So what I'll do now is go ahead and share a very concise perspective regarding health and fitness, and then we'll go ahead and conclude with your plans for this year. So the perspective I want to share today is really about making a health and fitness approach as time efficient as possible. And the idea is, let's focus on like what is the biggest problem here that I see is that a lot of gym dependent approaches or location dependent approaches really restrict your ability to adhere to the process that's required to make a physical transformation, especially if you're an executive or you're an entrepreneur that's constantly traveling, or you have to take calls to take constantly. A process where you have to go to a location and exercise and depend on that as a main mechanism to make a transformation makes it far more difficult to adhere to. So the idea is, instead of focusing on a location dependent approach where you have to shift your entire schedule on for it, focus on a location independent approach where you can do it anytime, anywhere. Something I would specifically recommend is leveraging like step count, because step count is something you can do while you're listening to this podcast, while you're traveling, or potentially anywhere there's ground underneath you, you can essentially do it. And that's the idea behind it. The other aspect behind it is you can multitask with it. You can take a phone call, you can essentially handle business tasks at the same time. And that's the idea. Can you make it something that can be adaptable to your schedule as opposed to you making time for it? And that's kind of the whole idea behind what I want to share today. And just to show you that it's possible, I actually lost over 70 pounds using this specific strategy. So hopefully it gives a different perspective than what you're typically sold on, and potentially a pathway that could actually work for you. So hopefully that was valuable to the listeners. What we'll do now is go ahead and shift the conversation to Ravi's plans for next year or this year.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, that's impressive. That's really incredible. I'm a true believer in that as well.
Thank
And so
you.
it's really cool, and congratulations, because, health and wellness is all you've got. It
Agreed.
really is. And like, I think even to what I was saying before of like, when you realize that there are other people in the world and you're not the most important, you do also realize like how important your health and wellness is in that context, right? So the less you can like stress about trying to be the most important person in the room, and that actually you are the most important to your own room yourself, is so liberating, I think.
Hmm. Hmm.
So yeah, congrats on your journey, man, because I think that's
Thank
really,
you.
really incredible. And I think like inspiring people with that is huge, because it's true. Like, even as I was traveling so much, I was taking like small 5-pound weights in my luggage and then
Wow.
doing the workout in the room, because you go to like, all of a sudden you're in like Seoul, and I'm like, yeah, I could go.
Exactly.
Yeah, got to get to a weird place to get the workout. Then you got to learn the whole thing. You're like, well, if I know what the things are that I need to do, and I think step count is huge.
Right.
Um, and then I had little smaller weights to do just like in room workouts. Then you can kind of get everything you need, take a walk, etc. Um, uh, that I think works wonders when you're traveling. But anyways, to answer your question about this year, I'm starting a new role at Nutrafol. I just started a few weeks ago. It's a company in a wellness supplements space, focused on hair loss. I think getting into that business and understanding what its needs are, it's kind of, it's at a 1 billion valuation right now, and they're trying to
Mhm.
move it up pretty quickly. The category is getting inundated with, GLP-1 and, fast tracks to like, weight loss and stacking and all these types of things that I think are kind of scary. So one will be introducing myself to this business, understanding it. The other is then I'm trying to work on my artwork and getting an art show together, which is really huge. And then the last thing is really, with all of that, spending as much time as I can with my family and trying to like really connect with them, because I think, my wife and I are sitting here going like, now we have two teenagers basically, and before you know it, as you know, you're in college, right? So
Mhm.
they're going to be in college, and then they're going to be doing stuff like work. So when you start measuring it out, like someone told me the other day, like think about how many summers you have left with your kids that are with you, you know.
Mhm.
I'm like, oh no. You start
Wow.
to reconfigure and reassess and get a new perspective on things. So I think all of that stuff is super important to like find a, as people say, I don't know if there's such a thing called work-life balance. I'm not sure there is, but I do think there's just balance. And I think this year is going to be really trying to find what balance is.
Right. Right. Awesome. Well, where do people learn more about you and the kind of artwork you're doing as well?
Well, I've got my website, ravihampole.com, and then there's also my
Perfect.
Instagram, which is also just at Ravi Hampole. And so you can find out all that stuff there. And one's just dedicated to artwork, and the other one's dedicated to work. And also very open to anyone that needs brand advice or consulting. I also
Yep.
do that work on the side. So if there's anyone that is starting something and is looking for some advice on how to build and create a story, and or even build their product, I'm totally down to have conversations and get into it.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining me, Ravi. This was Aryan Mohindra and Ravi Hampole.